was the bureau chief of the London Sunday Telegraph, Washington, D.C. bureau chief. And they told me essentially... I'm sorry?
No, I didn't say anything. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. And so, in any event, they told me the story, and I said to them when they told me, so why don't you call the Washington Post? And Ambrose kind of rolled his eyes like, here, this guy's a rookie. He doesn't know what he's talking about. So, and he was right. In years, about a year or 2 years later, one day I called up Ambrose. I said, can you just give me one honest reporter who's going to report on this? And he said to me, quite frankly, he said, well, there isn't one. And then we found out later from Reed Irvine, we had Reed sadly passed away, and we got his tapes. He taped all of his conversations. A number of them are we posted on the internet recently. He talked to Miguel Rodriguez, who was the prosecutor investigating the Foster case, grand jury prosecutor, lead prosecutor on the Vince Foster case under Kenneth Starr. And he said that he had gone to, and I'm quoting him, he said he talked to 100 journalists, and he said some of the journalists would be really quite interested, and then they would run it up to their editors, and the editors would kill it. And if the editors are interested, the editors run it up to the news execs, and the news execs kill it. So although we have a free press, it's not really quite how it functions.
Now, what about Ambrose Pritchett? What was your opinion of him? Did you think he was on the right side there, or?
Yeah, he was a straight shooter. He was probably the only journalist, a major journalist, who would tell the truth in his his editors didn't kill his stories. He wrote a couple of good stories. In fact, he was intimately involved in the problems that Patrick had as a grand jury witness. I know that Patrick probably told you the story about what happened to him, but let me just kind of real briefly to tell you the catalyst for his calling me.
Okay.
Back in October of 1995, and being so shaken up. He went to Fort Marcy Park and pulled over to urinate on July 20th, 1993. There was a guy, it was a very small parking lot. It's Fort Marcy Park, a federal park outside of Washington, D.C. And there were only two cars in the parking lot, a very small parking lot. And one of them was an old Arkansas Honda. And a couple of spaces down from that was a newer kind of subcompact car. And so Patrick pulled in, and the guy got out of his car and just stared at Patrick. It was kind of a cold, get the hell out of here sort of stare. And Patrick was a little bit unnerved by this, but anyway, he walked into the woods there. It was a heavily wooded park. Guy went to the first large tree, took care of business, and then as he was coming back, he heard the car door close, and he was a little bit nervous to that. He didn't know maybe the guy could be coming after him, and it had sort of a heightened sense of awareness. And in the event, he went back to the parking lot and got back into his own car and realized that the guy had gotten back to his car, and he was still staring at him, but he didn't really do anything. So Patrick got in his car and drove away, and that was it. And then the next day, he saw in the news that Vincent Foster, Deputy White House counsel under Bill Clinton, had been found dead in that park when he was there. So he called the park police and gave them a statement. Nobody came to visit him. Or the park police investigation, as it turned out, was only 17 days long, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But nobody came to see him, and he went about his life, and nothing happened. And then 18 months later, the FBI came to see him. It was under Robert Fisk, the Fisk investigation, and they interviewed him, and they tried to convince him that the car that he saw in the park, that is an older Arkansas car with Arkansas plates, could have been the car that he had seen. They were showing him photographs. It could have been this, could have been that, and he was just adamant. He said, absolutely not. He said, no, that was not the car. The car that he saw was a light brown car, and the car that they were showing was a much newer silver-colored car. And so that was it. And then Patrick went on his way, and nothing else happened. And then a year later, Ambrose Evans Pritchard contacted him and said, I understand that you were interviewed by the FBI. I had your FBI report. I'd like to interview you. And Patrick said, fine. Went over to Ambrose's office in Washington, D.C., and went through his reports and said, well, this is all lies. I didn't say this. I said that I said that it was an older car. And they said that he identified it as a 1988 to a 1989 Honda, which was what Vince Foster's car was. And then they interviewed him a second time, a couple of weeks later, and they took him to the FBI laboratory. He went to the car color panel, and he picked out a car color panel of the color of the car that he had seen, and that corresponded. The lab man told him that corresponded to an 83 or 84 Honda, which is what Patrick saw, and he was adamant that it was an older car. So in any event, so kind of fast forward back to where he's with Ambrose Evans Pritchard, and he said this is all lies. He said the FBI said that he couldn't identify the man in the future that he saw in the park, and that's the opposite of what Patrick said. He said he unnerved him and sort of gave him a heightened sense of awareness, and that sort of heightened his memory, and then. And so Ambrose wrote an article, a very lengthy article that was carried in the London Sunday Telegraph. It's not a tabloid. It's a very well-established newspaper in London. It's been around for like several hundred years, and it had and Ambrose had hired a sketch artist, and Patrick did a sketch of the man that he'd seen in the park, and it made some very derogatory comments about Kenneth Starr's investigation, and the FBI agents were working for him, and quoted Patrick as saying it was outright lies. So that article appeared in U.S. newsstands on a Wednesday, and then on a Thursday he got a subpoena, and the article also criticized Ken Starr for not calling Patrick before his grand jury. And then then the next day, the FBI agent knocked on his door and gave him a subpoena to testify before the Whitewater grand jury, and that was on a Thursday. And the FBI agent's name was Bransford, Agent Bransford, and he left him his card. Said, "If you have any problems or anything, give me a call," which is kind of a strange statement to make. And then beginning that day, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Monday, he was harassed, followed by teams of people on the streets of Washington when he took his regular walk. He had spoken with his girlfriend, now his wife, at the time, said, "Let's take a walk to DuPont Circle," and they took their regular walk, and there were people following him and staring at him, and it was really a very, very unnerving sort of thing. And then when he appeared before the Whitewater grand jury, he was asked about that, and then some newspaper articles appeared later. And they made fun of him, saying, "Well, here's a guy who says that a strange man was staring at him at the park, giving him a menacing stare, but he has a tendency to see that where everywhere he goes, every time he takes a walk, right, there are strange men at every street corner staring at him." So we spoke to a number of experts who were familiar with his technique of intimidation, and they said that they had used it and that they are aware of it, and that's how I got involved in Patrick started calling me during the course of this harassment. I went to go see him on a Friday. He was harassed on Thursday and Friday. I finally got in touch with him. We went to visit him on a Friday, and that was when Ambrose Evans Pritchard and Patrick were in Patrick's apartment.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. Back to the park. When he saw this car with the Arkansas plates, right, did Vince Foster's car also have Arkansas plates?
It did, but it was not it was not the same car.
I understand that.
It just wasn't. Yeah, Vince Foster's car also had plates.
Now that's interesting, because when I talked to Patrick, and I said to him, well, who do you think was behind this? He didn't think the Clintons were behind this. He thought maybe it was something higher up, like maybe Mossad or something, foreign intelligence was involved in this. But if the car or the hitman also had Arkansas plates, wouldn't that be a major connection back? Well, maybe not, because it's also Foster was from Arkansas too. But what do you make of that?
Well, I don't really know. I really don't know what to make of it. But before we start talking about the motive
right.
and the perpetrator, who it is, let's talk about the evidence because otherwise it's kind of a hypothetical. We're going to prove to your listeners that it was a murder before we start talking about the motive. I mean, we don't want it to be hypothetical in the minds of your listeners. Let's talk a little bit about the evidence.
Good point. Now, one other question, though, because Patrick mentioned to me, too, that he had spoken to someone or he had found out somehow that the local police had pulled their patrols. He had some kind of phrase he used for that area in the D.C. circle there you're talking about when people were confronting him. And he said he found out that the local cops had been pulled from their patrols in that area. Do you know anything about that?
No, I do not know anything about that.
Okay, well, then continue. Give us some more evidence to build your case. You're obviously a very well a professional speaker here. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, if you're investigating this, the official version is that Vince Foster got in his own car, left the White House a little bit after 1 o'clock, drove to Fort Marcy Park, walked up into a kind of a secluded area, took out his own revolver, placed it in his mouth, and pulled the trigger. That's the official version. So think about it. What is it that you would want to know to either confirm or refute that? You want to know about the car. We just talked about that. His car wasn't there. You want to know about the gun, the gunpowder, the bullet, the wounds, the blood, the person who discovered the body, the autopsy. Maybe a little bit of talk about depression, although that's not really dispositive of anything. I mean, you can murder depressed people too if they were depressed, which you wouldn't. But what do you want to talk about first? I'm not going to go through every aspect of the entire case, but I'll tell you this: the independent counsel statute was not renewed, but at the time. It required a report. And so the independent counsel's report, Ken Starr, wrote a report, and there is evidence of a cover-up and lies in that report on it's 112 pages, every single page. I mean, it is just that they didn't tell the truth about anything in that case. They make about 80 points, about 80 sort of minor points, and every one of them is a lie. And we proved that with using the federal government's own investigative records. And also, let me tell you and your listeners, because the news media has steadfastly refused to report this, under the independent counsel statute, if a witness is named in the report, that witness can ask the three-judge panel that appointed the independent counsel to order the independent counsel to attach a factual comment submitted by the witness. Now, having read that and knowing that Ken Starr's report was going to come out, and knowing essentially what the outcome, what his conclusion was going to be, we prepared a 11-page single-spaced letter with 9 pages of excerpts, that is photocopies, of federal investigative records attached to it, and asked the three-judge Court of Appeals, and sort of setting forth the common denominator in all of these investigations, which is the FBI, and proving 5 separate areas of a cover-up. And the three-judge Court of Appeals panel ordered Ken Starr to attach that letter to his report on Vincent Foster's death. Now, that's the only time in the history of the independent counsel statute that an independent counsel was ordered to attach evidence of a cover-up by his own investigators to his own report. And not one news media organization told the American people about it. So it proves that a number of things. Number one, that he did not own the gun. Number two, that the